Well, thanks, Mark. Obviously, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I really appreciate that. CX is something we write about a lot at Forrester, both from a technology and marketing perspective. But what our research has shown is vital to the success of any business. So irrespective of whatever market you're in, you have to have some sort of CX focus in the work that you do. Okay. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, first of all, about some of our slightly older research, what's called our customer obsessed operating model. But it kind of tees things up nicely. So full disclosure, the customer obsessed bit plays a lot better in the US than it does in Europe, as some of our European clients, it sounds a bit weird and creepy, but fundamentally what we're saying is you have to put the customer at the heart of everything you do. So I'll talk a little bit about that to start with. Then I'll introduce some more research on what we're calling the sort of modern technology operating model and how that actually serves customers and the customer experience. We'll then focus on then what that actually means for the likes of you and me on the call to try and ensure that IT services actually do what they're meant to do. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the concept of emotion within customer experience, because it's a vital part, but is often overlooked when we think of things, because a lot of us are technology people. We want sort of tangible technology things, and emotions can be tricky. But I'll talk a little bit about why that's important and what the factors are. But first of all, I just wanted to tell a little bit of story about a good customer experience I've had recently. So some of you may have seen in the news reports of fraudulent transactions on First Direct customers going to Nando's food. So I was one of those accounts and found out about it on Tuesday. So I noticed the transaction, called First Direct about it. So I went to their website, found the number nice and easily, the fraud number, and I wasn't misdirected through pages and pages of FAQs, eventually find the number scribbled away. It's nice and clear. Got straight through to someone during working hours. I wasn't on hold for ages. They were able to verify my identity nice and quickly and easily, listen to my problem, spoke to someone else within the organization for about 30 seconds, came back to me, apologized, confirmed the money would be paid back into my account, then put me straight onto someone else who confirmed they'd send me a new card and the old one had been cancelled, so there was no risk of the same thing happening again. So why am I telling you this? Well, last year we published our what is called our annual customer experience index of European banks, and in the UK, First Direct was second for the second year in a row. And the criteria used, First Direct outperformed all other European banks using the drivers that make up the customer service category. They did this, and why they focus on this is because they understand something crucial about their customers, and specifically the UK customers, in that in the UK, more than any other country, they find phone calls the most emotionally positive channel to use. Hence, they make it a very easy way to communicate with them. And why this is important? Well, it's important because First Direct have made profits every year since 1995, and our research shows that companies with leading customer experience make profits significantly larger than their competitors. So CX is really important to your business, and if you want to be successful, it's key in everything you do. Oh, sorry, I've got to be keener. So the customer obsessed operating model. It's made up of what we call 4 principles to start with. So the first is that you have to be kind of customer led. So in IT, this might mean doing things such as using design thinking to show how and when your strategy actually delivers customer value, or perhaps some continuous customer feedback loops for your initiatives to really make sure you're connecting with your customers. You also need to be insights driven. Now, very carefully here, it's insight driven, not data driven, because you have to learn something from the data that you got. So this might mean aggregating and acting upon customer feedback to change what or how you deliver, or using things such as contextual KPIs, such as XLAs that we'll talk about later, that really communicate value to your audience. The third is being fast, so doing maybe incremental deliveries rather than big batches, or accelerating the adoption of sort of DevOps approaches across your organization, or even introducing things like automation to increase both the speed and quality. And then the fourth is really being connected. So understanding that technology is increasingly a kind of team sport played across your organization and outside the technology silos. It's much more collaborative experience nowadays. Now, coupled to these 4 principles are kind of 6 levers that you can pull on to influence and change your organization. The key one is obviously culture, and we define that as the shared values and beliefs that drive the behavior in your organization. Now, an example of this is the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Group defines its culture as providing guests with the finest personal service and facilities with a warm, relaxed, yet refined ambience. Now, to embed this, it trains all of its employees on these principles, but more importantly, it gives staff the autonomy to actually fulfill those. So that's them demonstrating that they believe in their culture and they give people the opportunity to follow that. Structure is all obviously very important, and you want to get your structure to try and remove friction and enable some degree of autonomy, as we talked about within culture, and the ability to be able to adapt regularly to what you do. Spotify famously have their Spotify model that they use to kind of grow the revenue year by year, but you have to remember that that works for them. You simply can't copy someone else's structure. Every organization is unique and different. So you have to find the right structure for you. People are obviously crucially important. So your talent management strategies, your employee experience practices, very important to get right. And business results will improve with having empowered and inspired and enabled teams within your organization. Processes are obviously very important as well. So the way you work and make decisions. Companies that put customers at the center of their workflows and decision-making processes throughout the enterprise improve both the quality and efficiency of what they're doing. So again, the customer is key in making sure you win there. And obviously technology is important. So customers that have adaptive, creative and resilient tech strategies far outperform others in their industry. And some of our research we've done has suggested that the best can outperform the average by maybe 300, 400%. So technology is a crucial part in that whole playbook. And finally, metrics are important. So you want measurements that drive business decisions, not just that measure something for the sake of it. And what customer obsessed firms really do is they embrace metrics that really are rooted in their customer's life cycle. Okay, so very simply, 4 principles and 6 ways or 6 measures or 6 levers to pull on to be able to drive towards those. Okay. So you might say, well, Duncan, that's all well and good. That sounds great. That's brilliant stuff. But what can I do to affect my organization to really focus on customer experience and start to get some of those benefits that we can see? And this is really where this modern technology operations model comes in and can start to explain what it means for IT. So if you have a look at the diagram here on the right, I think most of us will see we play a part in somewhere in there, maybe in multiple areas, because modern IT roles tend to be much more hybrid and much less fixed. Now, this is one way of thinking about how a modern team fits together. There are obviously certainly lots of different other ways, but what drawing it out this way allows us to do is to work out a number of key kind of underpinning ideas that are universal to making any sort of service or shared service work for your customers. One of the first things you have to think about for principles is making sure that every practice within this model serves customers, both internal and external. So whether you like the term consumer or stakeholder or customer, it doesn't matter, but there's a strong orientation to those, having a strong orientation to those you're serving, and what successful outcome look like from their perspective is crucial. And this really is the essence of this approach. But looking at it, it's firmly grounded in a kind of IT service management principles and ideas about the way we work. And remember also that internal service is important because they may become tomorrow's revenue generators. An example of this is the US firm Zappos. So it explicitly allows its teams to seek external revenue opportunities as long as they're consistent with the team's mission and Zappos' overall principles. Fundamentally, what they do is almost use internal services as a test bed to things that they might then be able to make external money over. But principally, it's about serving those internal customers to then translate that and potentially into external customers. Secondly, at the bottom, you've got these foundational capabilities, and also the expertise within the whole model helps you accelerate and really scale in an agile way. Now, some agile advocates argue that every team within your organization should have all the skills it needs to succeed. But in reality, that, in a complex digital system, there's lots of different layers of service and capabilities that will have to meet and work together. Don Reinhartson, the author of Principles of Product Development Flow, once said that every time someone tells him that they're using a completely autonomous kind of cross-functional team, when he digs deeper, he finds that they've put in some mechanisms to create infrequent but quick access to really deep expertise. So it's very hard to get those teams completely autonomous. Actually, you're fitting together a number of different teams. But it's all about making sure you're able to scale in an agile way. And thirdly, using DevOps principles can strengthen the services and the service organization. So whether or not you're actually writing code, you can take your cue from the kind of ongoing improvement that's implicit in things like DevOps. So a continuous iterative process of experimentation, engagement, refinement, each of those elements is absolutely crucial to a modern services organization. One thing to note is that solving the collaboration and communication across all these teams remains the toughest challenge that you'll have. So that idealized notion I talked of a cross-functional autonomous unit of kind of 6-10 people can be very effective, but on a larger scale, it really requires multiple teams to contribute. And those teams, priorities can be aligned either outside in or inside out, but either way, it's key to foster and facilitate that real collaborative approach across all of those organizations. Okay. So if we accept that obviously customer experience is a driving force behind what we should do, then how do we then measure that and do that through a CX lens? So we have to start thinking about things here, about what is the desired outcome we're trying to get to. What does success look like? Who actually is the customer? Because, as I said, they can be internal, external, they can have lots of different facets. And kind of what is their experience of the service you're giving them? So to do this, we have to kind of think beyond the traditional kind of ticket or work order way of working that was perhaps traditional years ago, and think in a much more customer-centric way that really starts to mirror a lot of the consumer technology we receive every day at home. So the best of these principles are really making sure that it's obviously productive. So services you give must add value relative to other options that customers have got. So for example, if the service you provide allows customers to be really sort of self-support themselves, that's a great bit of value you've added, and that drives them to your service rather than somewhere else. Making those services pain-free is important. So accessing any service should be easy, should not take a lot of effort to discover, evaluate, and kind of request options. If you think of maybe when you're, well, kind of pre-pandemic a bit more, but ordering a plane ticket, it's very easy to kind of go through your options and decide, do I want a preferable time? Do I want to save money? But it's very easy for that experience for you to get that ticket. Okay, so it's got to be try and make it pain-free. It should also be pervasive, and what I mean with it is it should be accessed via some sort of typically a centralized portal. So we're talking about typically a service catalog here, and very often nowadays we're talking about enterprise-wide service catalogs. And on the back of that, don't just think of it being limited to IT services. Business services in general should be available through the channel as well, so that in effect what your customers get, whether internal or external, is a one-stop shop to go and solve the problems. Okay. We also need to start thinking about making these services personalized. So you need to recognize the customer who's coming in and provide them with appropriate offerings. What you want to avoid is things like making people rekey things a number of times. You want them to be personalized and keep them involved. And also increasingly what we're finding is as technology moves on, is trying to make some of these services predictive. So moving from a reactive stance to a proactive stance is an important strategy for working efficiently. So this is where AI and machine learning come in, and they can sort of flag signals or indicate problems that require attention before the service is affected. So thinking about the services you provide in these 5 ways can help you to really service your customers effectively. Okay. So what's the kind of implication for IT service management on to move into this much more sort of customer-centric model? Well, what we're seeing in the market is that teams are becoming aligned a lot more along product management lines rather than what you might call a more traditional service management setup. Now, some might suggest this is just simply a different term for the same thing, but we actually think there's a shift happening in both the thinking and structure of service management teams. And this EPOC model demonstrates some of the behaviors of these new teams and the things that they're doing. So one of the things we're finding becoming more pervasive is this idea of being empathetic. So you need to be able to understand your customer and their identity. So, to be able to discover and enable customer journeys that they're going through and improve those and be attentive to the experience they're getting. But it's that idea about being empathetic to their needs and their wants. This idea of persistence is increasing. So rather than just funding along sort of annual budget cycles when at the beginning of the year you don't really know what money you need, you fund things as long as there's a value and a need for that service. And when there isn't, you stop. Making sure services are much more outcome oriented is important. So focusing around things like the value you create, the outcomes that are actually sent that customers feel, not just a set of deliverables and actions that may be out of date by the time delivering. So new teams, they design, they operate, they sustain these value experiences rather than just sticking to a set of deliverables that may or may not be right. As I said again, what we're seeing is these new teams are being much more collaborative. So they're using face-to-face, or as we've seen in the last couple of years, face-to-virtual face, ongoing communications. And that's crucial when humans are involved in decision-making and discussion, but then also using automation aggressively when it's best to do so. So thinking about when and where automation can help and really aggressively going and using that to help the experience. But on the other side, making sure you're collaborative as human beings by nature are. And lastly, again, as I talked earlier about making teams a bit more heterogeneous, i.e. building teams that are both diverse and multi-skilled and have outside in and inside out perspectives, so that you're seeing it from both from the customer's point of view, but also understanding what that means for the team itself. Okay, so this is an interesting change in mentality we're seeing in a lot of teams as they work. Okay, so if you understand we have to create a good customer experience and we understand how to start structuring our teams to do that, what does it really mean for the delivery of services on an ongoing basis? So firstly, for employee services, I might call it kind of the operational experience, it's critical to provide a technology experience that gives employees productivity, that engages them, and also retains them into the work that they're meant to be doing. So similar to technology services, employee services are increasingly becoming platform-based. So organizations manage the technology experience using product principles, but they also leverage those soft skills I talked about and metrics to do things like maybe employee journey mapping or using XLAs to really identify issues and gauge on their progress. And in addition to those sorts of activities, we're also doing things like, technology organizations moving to kind of maybe productivity and collaboration suite. So if you think about, Things like, Office 365, and all the services that provides is very important. Thinking about end user computing in a much more focused way, moving to things like enterprise service management to really focus on supporting the whole enterprise, and also new ideas like, end user experience management. These are all things that become much more important in the way employee services are delivered to organizations. Now that thinks about the kind of employee services, employee experience. What about sort of technology services? Well, technology services include a lot of things core infrastructure, monitoring, continuous delivery, coordinate capabilities such as request and change and incident management. And what a lot of organizations are doing now is really revitalizing these core services and really powering the experience with using those platforms and using things such as the new features within enterprise service management to really get an understanding of what has been delivered. Start to use things like AI ops to make things more efficient, and also we're seeing more and more use of kind of virtual agents and IT chatbots. But obviously that is, that's another topic again about the success of that. But what using those technologies helps us do is really build and deliver and monitor dependable services that enable organizations to start to innovate and ensure there's a degree of resiliency in those organizations, so that it's really allowing people to do what they need to do, i.e. technology supports them in their everyday work. So I've talked a bit about the kind of that customer operating model and the things you might be able to do. I've talked a little bit about what you can start to change and what that means. But I think one thing we often forget about is the emotion involved in any experience. So when I was planning this session, I had an interesting conversation about shift left, and we'll talk about that later, and what it actually means for IT service management. And it reminded me that one of the things we often forget about when it comes to delivering products and services is that customer experience comes laced with emotion. All experiences are, of course, full of emotion. There's, some of you may have seen, there's a new series out now called Severance, and I'm not giving away too much when I tell you that the kind of conceit of the show is that employees undergo a procedure that separates their work selves from their home selves. In reality, that doesn't happen. Whether we like it or not, we bring our emotions from home to work and vice versa. But emotion isn't the only part of an experience. When we talk about customer experience in Forrester, we always break it down to three components. So effectiveness, ease, and emotion. So effectiveness, how effective was the experience of meeting my needs? Ease, how easy was the experience to me? And also, what did the experience make me feel? With things like automation, for example, we often think about removing the emotion from the services we provide, but we can't unless they're completely seamless and faultless. And paradoxically, we could never get them to be seamless and faultless without making mistakes and learning from them. We can't remove the emotion. Emotion is always involved. So when we think about how we deliver products and services, how can we harness this understanding of emotion to really improve the customer experience that is being provided? Okay. So obviously emotion is a tremendously complex and diverse area, and I'm not going to try and solve or explain everything about emotion, but I'm just going to make a couple of points that you might want to think about and use when you're delivering services. So the part that emotion plays in our decision-making process is very, very important. So a researcher, Gerald Zaltzman, estimates that when consumers make purchases, 95% of the time, they make little or no consideration about that purchase. In other words, they buy something because it feels right, not because they've done a mountain of research. And similarly, you have to appreciate that people using the products and services you create and manage react or interact in that same emotional way. So what we understand about emotion is increasing, is becoming increasingly open as time goes on. So things like economic theory to neurology to psychology are giving us some of the answers about the perspectives on emotion and how kind of upend some old notions we had about emotion and what we think about it. So one of the things to remember is that emotion is the companion of rational thought, not its opposite. You know, a common misperception is that humans apply reason and logic to beat back emotional or rational impulses. But from a neurological standpoint, the two are very heavily intertwined, and the emotional processing and stimuli informing kind of rational systems on what to pay attention to and what to remember. So your messages should always appeal to both the rational and emotional processing that's hardwired into our brains. Another point is that emotions are inherent in all people and all experiences. Because emotion and reason are inseparable at the neurobiological level, there are more similarities and differences in the role emotions play in processing different experiences and in the way that affects people's decisions. It's a mistake to think that one gender or another is more emotional, or that a particular age group is more emotionally invested. Similarly, thinking of the digital experiences as purely kind of utilitarian, just the service, overemphasizes the ease and effectiveness of parts, but starts to ignore the potential that really digital services, devices, and media have for kind of augmenting that emotional connection to a customer. Now, I'm not saying that to deliver services you have to have a deep understanding of the kind of neurophysiology of emotion or anything, but just be aware that it's there is an important step in delivering stuff. Okay. So a very, very quick conclusion. I'm sorry. Oh, go back. Apologies for that. I didn't realize there's a build there. So no IT team can any longer ignore the need to understand the customer experience when you build products and services. It's critically important. To do that, you need to think about restructuring to a newer model and a new organization so that you can focus on delivering those experiences that people would actually like to receive. In turn, you need to change the way you measure both internal and external services to make sure that they take account of those experiences and the effectiveness and emotion involved in them and aren't just utilitarian. And then also remember that emotion is such a key component of any experience, and you need to be aware of it and take it on board.